Hi, my name is Sudesh Shetty. I'm a partner with KPMG in the risk advisory practice. Been a partner here for almost 5 years now. I come with 20 years of experience in the technology landscape, of which the last 14 years has been in forensic. I also lead the forensic technology practice for KPMG in India. And joining me today is Sony Anthony, and I'll hand it over to him for a brief introduction of himself.
Thank you very much, Sudesh. Hi everyone, my name is Sony Anthony. I'm a partner with KPMG Risk Advisory Services, Risk Consulting Services. I specialize in cybersecurity. Having said that, cybersecurity is agnostic, but specific sectors are looking at cybersecurity quite with a keen eye, primarily because if you look at the energy utilities and environments, we see a lot of OT related cyber issues today, quite prevalent. And I think this discussion that Sudesh and myself we are having is around IT issues, integration with OT, the cyber element around it, and challenges with the forensic situations that we have on ground. And I think we can just move on, Sudesh, if you have the first
Sure.
topic.
So let me start off. Let me start off and see as to how we see the threat landscape that has changed in the last couple of years from a cyber incident perspective.
Yeah.
What is it that you are seeing?
So Sudesh, if you look at it, 15 years back, the kind of technology that companies were adopting is completely different from what we are using today, right? I mean, even if you look at IT Act, the kind of technologies that you spoke about, it's nearly 20 years into its existence. The technologies that we use today are completely different, right? From IoT, which gets integrated into a plant or let's say an energy company from a technology perspective. There is huge number of threat vectors which have changed. Sophisticated attacks have come into picture. Having said that, at least 68% of companies have been compromised in the last 2 years. And of the 68%, you can actually say 91% have had adequate or up-to-date security measures in place, which means to say that even with this technology, even with the security maturity that people have in place, the attacks are just increasing. So the threat landscape is changing dramatically. Primarily, if you look at it, three areas where these threats are getting initiated from. The first one is the normal phishing emails or phishing attachments. The second aspect is towards data exfiltration. And the third one is around the ransomware or the malicious code itself on the network. And OT is not far away from it. And I think that's where I see it. What do you think, Sudesh?
No, very aptly put, Sony. What was or what used to be just a defacing of a website as a challenge that a corporate would face to a data or an IP theft, the current trend is towards disruption. And when we talk about ransomware, the ransom aspect of it is what's bleeding organizations more than just the impact to the network. Data exfiltration that you rightly brought in, and the threat of that data being leaked onto the internet domain is the larger threat that organizations have now come across. And this isn't changing any sooner. And the best of organizations we've seen as getting impacted, and that is primarily because the weakest link is not essentially the perimeter defense, but more of the individual who's getting compromised through a malicious link, an attachment, or an enticement that we see quite frequently as the source or the origin of a particular attack that comes in.
So that's which is in fact leading to this changing threat perspectives as well between IT and OT. And if you look at it, IT typically had this CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. But when we look at OT networks, it's a little reversed. In fact, something called control and availability is high on the list. And then comes integrity and availability and integrity. And in an energy company or a manufacturing company where OT environments are the technology environment, control is basically looking at how you can safeguard your assets. And second comes in is the availability aspect in terms of disruption of service. So if you look at the triad, what they call it, like CIA, what we see in the IT environment is completely has to be viewed in a different angle when you're looking at the OT environment. Having said that, there are challenges again from an IT OT perspective. In an OT environment, the discovery of assets is the biggest challenge. Because of disparate systems or the network, you have multiple levels of technologies. Like if you go by the Purdue model, you have actuators, sensors, drives, which is the basic core of it. And then you come to, let's say, PLCs, HMIs, then you have the SCADA DC systems, then you have historian systems, and then comes the DMZ network and the ERP systems. Now, each one of these different layers operate in different protocols, different signals, different types of, let's say, tools are used. Unlike, let's say, an IT environment where it is, let's say, a Windows shop or a Unix shop or maybe a combination of these environments as well, but the tools and the discovery tools are quite adequate to manage them. Including aspects, I think the other threat challenge or perspective is more from how do you mitigate or how do you identify vulnerabilities. Easier in an IT environment, but in OT environment, you really can't identify what are the vulnerabilities across all systems. And even if you do, remediation of some of these are a challenging situation because even if you have to put in a patch for a OT element, either you have to take a shutdown of it, right? Or some of these are legacy systems because of which we don't have the patch itself in place. So some of these are the kind of challenges I see from a cyber perspective between IT and OT. But I think I'd like to get your views as well, Sudesh. What do you think?
So, sorry, now you brought it out beautifully. But the other challenge that comes in, which is where an organization has to differentiate between an IT and OT environment, is where does the control lie? Who controls the environment? Is it the in-house ID team or is it the specialized engineering team that runs the shop?
Yeah.
Who are your third parties who are driving this remotely? And what is the kind of environment that they are existent in? The larger threat that we've seen is the access that is provided through RDP protocols.
Yeah.
Now, most of the ransomwares that have been exploiting company environments, there are two means of entry. The first mean of entry is an email communication going across and enticing an individual to go click and compromise his or her asset. And from there, the propagation. But there's a second level of access that's possible. And that second level of access is where your third parties come in. And the kind of access that's been provided to them, especially in an OT environment where the systems are complex and you need the providers of or the OEMs to jump in and help troubleshoot. That's the other part that I see very clearly as a risk that's been capitalized on in the ransomware attacks that we've seen in the last couple of years.
I agree with you. And I think the other angle that we have to also look is how some of these systems are structured from a, rightly put what you brought up from an access perspective. Identity and access management is very much required on an OT environment. And I think a number of organizations are grappling with an issue of how to integrate be it, let's say, a privilege management system or an identity and access management system on an OT environment. These are some of the areas I think if we are able to address it in a mature fashion, we will probably have a lot more safer environment. And rightly, like you brought out, the integration of IT and OT is, there was a point in time when we had air gap systems. There were technologies like data diodes, which used to segregate the IT and OT environment. But today, because of business requirements and business need, you end up having integration between the ERP and to make sure in real time you have information that's there coming out of these sensors, PLCs. And I think that's creating challenges. And it will probably continue unless until we put in good security posturing with respect to tools on ground.
True. And that posturing is not essentially is within, but is also an enforcement that posturing happens at the third party, which is managing the asset as well. And that's something that's the change that I see should be coming in soon, where the liability is not just kept within the organization, but the liability is also transferred out in case of an incident to a third party. So knowing the risk they
Yeah.
understand as to what precautions that needs to be taken from their end as.
So yeah, so to add to it, while we brought out the aspect of third parties, and we are looking at a lot of technology to control the environment. I think there's a lot of push in the recent past I have seen with respect to regulations, frameworks, and standards which are specific to, let's say, energy, specific to the OT environment in ENR. So you have, let's say, while you have the traditional ISA 62443 standard, which is structuring how the Purdue model has to be implemented from a segmentation or a design of an OT environment. From a security perspective, there is an ISO standard, I think it's 27019. NIST framework is also an adoption for critical infrastructure. Having said that, I think ENISA also has a framework for OT environments, especially critical infrastructure environments. So there is a huge, at least, change in adoption of these new standards, new frameworks, which are specific to the OT environment, keeping in mind the new issues that are at hand, right? So I think, like you brought out, some of these standards also address the risk that is coming in from third parties. So third-party risk management, how do they access? What is the kind of jump server they connect to? In some cases, what happens is when you have on-site maintenance, right? And I've seen this in the past where most of the devices on an OT environment have the default password set. And this is primarily because in the event, there needs to be a quick check of the system. The plant operations, right, does not permit someone to really go back and check and look at what type of passwords were used. And so they have this default password. And therefore, you have a lot of hard-coded passwords on these systems. And that's where exploiters tend to manipulate the system and try to. So with good governance, good processes and policies in place, we should be able to enhance the security measure, not just at the internal network, right, coming out from the external third parties as well. I think that's something which I thought too.
Definitely, Sony. And just to take it a bit further, if I play it in from an investigator perspective, and when I look at it as an incident which has to have an element of forensic performed, the missing element that comes in is logs and the management of these logs. Now,
Yeah.
whenever we come across logs, they are either insufficient, flushed out, overwritten,
Yeah.
or never enabled. And
Yeah.
this happens more in the OT environment than in the IT environment. For the IT environment has graduated into a state where there is a conscious reconciliation that's taking place. The
And I
other
think
aspect that
sorry.
comes through is how is how are these logs being monitored and who's
Yeah.
monitoring it? Is it the team within engineering? Is it the team within IT? Is it a consortium? Or is it a third party which is essentially engaged to manage the whole infrastructure from a security perspective as well? And how do they read it? Who are the people who are running it? Are they trained well enough? Are they
Yeah.
looking at it from the latest threat perspective or attack vector perspective? That's the other element that will come in play in a
Yeah.
big way.
Agreed completely. The other challenge I would like to bring about is why you brought out this aspect of availability of logs, and also able to read these logs, understand them, and take action around it. I have seen challenges on an OT environment where some of these devices are not equipped to provide the required logs itself. Because these systems had been built with functionality and performance in mind, but not with security in mind. Uh, at the least, probably they used to plonk in some error codes or some debug messages on the consoles and things like that. Never they had streamlined logs which could be passed on to, let's say, a central repository where you could conduct correlation of various logs coming from different systems and then come up with understanding of what is on the network. Because most of them operate on different protocols, they're made by multiple different OEM vendors, and so that has been a challenge always. Added to that, now that there are a couple of tools and technologies which are able to read off these disparate systems, yet we don't have those required people or bandwidth or skill to in fact understand some of this. It is a journey, I think. What we used to see on the IT environment is probably now maturing slowly from the OT side. But I completely agree with you on these areas
So
of
my
chat.
next question to you, and this is something that we always talk offline as well. How has it changed with the COVID situation? Are we seeing a spike in cyber incidents? Uh, and how are organizations trying to manage with uh, no presence on ground? Uh,
So
how is it that's being done right now?
yes. So I'll give you an example here. What's happening at least if you see at large across all organizations, because people are working from home, they are now having a internet connection which is unfiltered, a direct internet connection. On that internet connection, you have a wireless router on which you have at least 12 devices which belongs to the family. Now, these could be senior members of the family, or it could be the kids who are also accessing various sites. These sites could be gaming sites. The senior folks could be addressing some of these gambling sites. And everywhere you have aspect of, let's say, a token, or let's say a level or a reward by way of a phishing attack. Now, when you translate that to, let's say, how it is working in the energy sector, you have a number of third parties who are providing remote maintenance to organizations. Now, imagine a situation where some of their systems are compromised with a malicious code which is integrated into a browser. This piece of malicious code is able to identify what type of traffic, what type of access log is going to that VPN connection to service what type of equipment. And by learning over a period in time, that's when you have, let's say, a more sophisticated attack launched by some of these cyber attackers directly to the OT environment using credentials which have been, in fact, extracted. And some of these are privileged credentials. So the challenge I'm seeing is I've seen a large number of organizations have cyber attacks post-COVID. Uh, Pre-COVID, the endpoint was probably in a secure, logical, local network, which was within the organization. Now, even though that system is on a VPN, we believe it to be secure, but it is not, because it has multiple other internet channels connecting to it and many other hosts on that router, or let's say internet router or wireless router at home, which are probably talking to the same device and learning from it. So I think it's increasing tremendously. And there are a large number of organizations who have had, in the recent past, I would say, ransomware attacks, or by way of phishing emails, or even to the extent of data exfiltration, just because of working from home. So what we need to do, we need to really redesign some of our technologies. The traffic that is coming in from endpoints has to be re-looked into. We need to redesign some of our SIM tools to understand reverse traffic which is coming in, and try to then put cases, or let's say used cases, which are COVID based specific use cases, and then structure our tools to in fact relate and respond to some of these attacks.
Rightly said, Sony. And what's happened is, when I look at it from an investigations perspective,
Yeah.
In the last 8 months, what we realized is that the players who have compromised the machines long back have suddenly started exploiting the situation of no hands and feet on ground. While the endpoints have moved home, the servers are still resident in the data farms.
Yeah.
And the weekend attacks, the long weekend attacks, the attacks that would start on a Friday and then create turmoil are quite frequent now. The other aspect that came in a big way is whatever was compromised before is now coordinated better by an attacker. And when I say an attacker, it's not an individual now. It's more of multiple sets of people with different agendas working through the food chain of an attack and deciding and defining, is credential compromise my aim? Is data exfiltration my aim? Or is ransom and the demand of a ransom my aim? Yeah. And the bounty that they collect is shared across.
Hmm.
So in the investigations that I've done, I've seen organizations that have been compromised almost a year back, suddenly seeing the heat of a ransomware now.
Hmm.
The exploits that had compromised a particular network, uh, and most of the attacks are not 0 day. They are essentially attacks that have happened much in advance, prior to the day that we see as a compromise. And these are now in a more coordinated, more harmonized manner. Um, uh, IP is the most sought after in an organization now, and that is what they are going after. Sensation is the other aspect that they are going after. Uh, the third aspect and the last aspect is, once everything has been stolen, is the aspect of disruption, which is kind of denial of service, to which the expectation is to be that we get paid, and if you don't get paid, well, you stay encrypted, right? So those aspects are coming out quite regularly now, as compared to just a data theft, a breach, or an incident of a probable compromise that's been detected by an admin. Uh, the other time that we are seeing is wiping off of backups,
Hmm.
wiping off of all the logs that could lead us to the infiltrator. And these are smart scripts. Uh, when it comes to wiping off of backups, here again, we see a very different shift now being explored from online real-time backup to the suggestions going back to say, why don't you explore what used to be in the good old days, kind of a tape backup, where it's an offline backup. Do you have those? Those are the ones that will only help you recover in case of a ransomware attack. Now, for each ransomware is coming in equipped to wipe off your real-time backups. It's compromising that aspect as well. So that's something that I'm seeing now with COVID uh, as as the new trend.
How about, Sudesh, if I may ask, in COVID, with respect to forensic investigations, right? In the past, we probably used to image a hard disk locally.
Yeah.
If there are situations of cyber attacks, how do you handle that from a remote perspective today?
So, Sony, let me answer out on what's happening in terms of now with COVID situation and a cyber incident where we need to take care of the disk imaging aspect. Now, before a disk imaging starts off, I mean, the first thing that we do is what we tell a client: if you see a threat of an incident, or if you have an incident, the first thing you need to do is switch off all your switches, isolate and ensure that your organization does not exchange information between the different sites, different geographies. First aspect. The second aspect is, uh, if I can, I would definitely fly an individual to carry out imaging. But where I can't, uh, remote imaging or shipment of hard disk are the two manners in which we are taking care of the investigation, where the disk comes back to the forensic lab of KPMG in India. And from there, we start our analysis. Now, when we talk about shipment, here again, the manner in which is dealt with, there are two or three options. We try and see to it that the asset is provided for in one of the nearest KPMG location, and from there our team takes over, ensures that its forensic replica is created locally before the analysis starts off. Uh, the second aspect that comes in play is the root cause part of it. Uh,
Yeah.
Remote imaging is essentially done to ensure that the evidence of anything to everything that went wrong exists. So the ability to identify the perpetrator stays with us. And here, when we say perpetrator, the perpetrator would be a compromised ID, a domain admin, or a system administrator. The perpetrator would be an IP. The perpetrator would be scripts And there are a lot of scripts that we've identified in these investigations, which are beautifully crafted to create havoc. They're doing nothing else. Uh, and then the last aspect is to determine the timeline of the incident. When did it start? Because the epicenter is not the disruption, but the epicenter then becomes the asset from where it originated and where all it actually spawned out. It becomes critical to determine that for no organization is able to pinpoint in a disrupted environment as to what did I lose. Uh, the aspect of a forensic investigator comes in to let him know as to what we saw as large loss. Is it through timestamps? Yes. Is it through large data set residing in one asset, which need not be in that asset? Is two? Is it in terms of protocols and services started on particular assets which allow exfiltration, which was never called for? Those are the signals and signs that we look for when we're doing these investigations.
So what do you see, Sudesh? What are the kind of trends are you seeing with respect to incident management, strategic perspective between, let's say, small clients, mid clients, or large clients? Do they all have a single type of a plan, or from a strategic perspective, what do you see?
Now, if I have to break it up into small, medium, and large, all are vulnerable. And the reason all are vulnerable is the endpoints have moved.
Yeah.
Right. While the perimeter is secure, the people accessing the perimeter are dispersed. Right. So there is a shift that's happening from the traditional antiviruses that were being used to now what becomes as proactive threat or continuous threat monitoring endpoints that are now being provided in the market. That's the first aspect that comes in. The second aspect that comes in, which is being looked upon by the organizations that are impacted, is that they have started to proactively now get into a more individual department level or an outsourced model of threat monitoring.
Sure.
And that aspect is again playing big for these organizations are curious to understand, is there something that is remnant and still propagating?
Yeah.
No attack in the current environment that we are seeing yet is driven by one exploit. When we investigate, we are seeing multiples of implants. So when an individual came into your house, he came in through the door or the window. Once he is in, it's not just that he's taken everything that he wants to as valuables. He's also put in certain back doors, and these back doors are not one.
Sure.
Traditionally, organizations would believe once eradicated, they are safe to function again. The new threat that exists is the back doors still would exist. So continuous monitoring is something that an organization is proactively doing it. Plus audits and third-party audits included in there, that's being seen as the manner in which organizations are trying to take more control of the environment where even the best of technology will fail otherwise.
Yeah. So I think I agree with you, because I see a number of organizations in their cyber incident management plan. They probably did not have the capability, bandwidth, or skill to go through the entire process of, let's say, identification, containment, eradication, and recovery. But organizations largely now have started to have a department focused towards forensic and investigation locally. And in clients where they don't have that appetite for building a team like this, I think are adopting retainer services as well by companies who provide this as a service. And I think that's structuring their incident management plan, keeping in mind the kind of tools and technologies that are required across IT and OT. So I think it is a big shift that is going through. A number of energy companies also are working towards. In fact, in some other companies, I've seen audit teams, internal audit teams are having this skill and capability as well, just such that if they would like to understand what is the kind of process, or let's say if there is an event tomorrow, how do you really work around an investigation. But I think largely we have covered a lot that we've learned today. I think, Sudesh, and thank you very much for the views that you gave. I think in summary, and I'll also fall back on you for any thoughts that we can summarize. I think we spoke about um, how the integrated environment is coming in, how disparate systems are there on OT environments. Inventory is a big issue. Because of inventory, uh, we don't know what type of patches are available on each one of these devices. Even if we have required patches, we probably need a shutdown time on some of these devices, or some of these devices are legacy. That's one angle to it. Second angle, I think the industry is moving towards adopting frameworks and standards which are very much oriented towards critical infrastructure. You brought out a very good point about just not looking at internal user, not just looking at the work from home, but also looking at the contractors, the third party management companies who actually connect back to some of these systems and provide maintenance and support. That's a huge thing. We also spoke about, I think, what organizations should be looking at from a cyber incident management strategy and plan, including a response service, how they need to put it in place. Mapping it to a NIST framework, looking at what the industry is doing, enhancing skill set, bandwidth, enhancing the tools, making sure this SIM and SOC looks at IT and OT together. So I think it's a big shift that even stakeholders between IT environments and OT environments should realize and come together to make sure both the networks are secure. I think that's something that I learned based on this discussion. Your thoughts, Sudesh?
No, definitely, Sony. And then there's so much in this topic that we could talk through and bring forward. Uh, but the larger theme that comes in is this a clear and present danger? Yes, this is a clear and present danger. Are you exposed and at threat? Yes. Is there a possibility that this will happen to you? Um, what used to be thought as a non-existent and only in the media would happen to an organization next door, not me, is now become a real threat, where each organization now thinks of it as a risk that is a boardroom topic of discussion. We've seen organizations get impacted in that sense. So that is where I feel that awareness is critical, as also the people who are managing and mapping your cyber framework uh, need to be better equipped and better trained.
Sure. Yeah, I agree with you.
That's the last part that I thought I'd bring in, Sony. That's it from me.
Thank you, Sudesh, for this discussion. I learned a lot, and I think I'll connect back with you again on understanding aspects of remote forensics, especially with new technologies that are around. Maybe that's a topic for another discussion, another podcast.
Definitely.
Great meeting you and talking to you on this. Thank you.
Same here.
Sudesh.
Take care.